The most dangerous predator in the room isn't the one shouting for attention. It's the one crying in the corner, meticulously logging your weaknesses into a mental file cabinet of grudges, waiting for the perfect moment to make you pay for their own insecurities.
Welcome to The Debates.
Yeah, welcome everyone.
Today, we're dissecting the covert narcissist. And the central question we are wrestling with today is really about the true locus of this personality type's power. Like, where does it actually come from?
Right, the root of the control.
Exactly. And I look at this from a behavioral profiling perspective. So I argue that their power is rooted in calculated predatory masking. It's the mechanics of how they intentionally weaponize things like pity, depression, and, introversion to execute subtle manipulation and gain absolute control over their targets. And I come at it from a different way, from a clinical, trauma-informed perspective. I argue that focusing primarily on the predator strategy kind of misses the actual pathology. I mean, the defining feature of covert narcissism isn't the camouflage itself, right? It's the systematic dismantling of the victim's reality. The true locus of their power resides entirely in the emotional wasteland they create, plunging the target into this trauma-bonded state of profound self-doubt.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. You see the damage, which is valid, totally valid. But we have to look at the architect of that damage. When you profile a covert narcissist, you are looking at someone whose superiority complex is fully intact.
Oh, yeah, completely.
But it's heavily disguised, right? They are chronically envious and deeply resentful. But instead of raging outwardly when they feel slighted like a typical overt narcissist would, they use a deeply ingrained victim mentality to exact revenge. So this fragility, it is a calculated illusion. It is a tactical maneuver to avoid accountability while maintaining absolute control. They use their perceived weakness as an absolute shield.
Well, you're looking at the weapon, but I'm looking at the wound. The true tragedy is how the victim internalizes the abuse, walking on eggshells and believing they are the ones who are defective. Covert narcissists operate by forcing their targets to live in a dense, suffocating state of fog, fear, obligation, and guilt.
The fog, right?
Yeah. And the destruction of the victim's psychological safety is where the power actually lives. You end up with a person who is constantly second-guessing their own memory. The power isn't the camouflage, it's the cognitive dissonance they implant in the victim's mind, which literally makes the target actively participate in their own psychological subjugation.
Wait, look at how they use pity to get there, though. Because that's not depression, that's weaponized guilt designed to trap you.
Well,
No, seriously, think about it. When a covert narcissist sits on the couch and sighs heavily, saying things like, "People never notice how smart I am," or "I just want what's best for you," while tears well up in their eyes, they are engaging in coercive control.
sighs deeply. This is exactly what trips victims up, though. It is endlessly frustrating to unpack in a clinical setting.
Because it looks so real.
Because what happens mechanically? The victim sees someone in genuine pain. The tears are wet. The sigh sounds real. So the victim's empathy is triggered and they step into a caretaker role or like a problem solver role. But the narcissist isn't actually looking for a solution to their problem.
No, they want a host.
Exactly. They are looking for a permanent caretaker. The victim sacrifices their own needs to soothe them, only to realize, years later, that they are completely depleted. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. Your brain simply struggles to process the idea that someone crying on your couch, appearing completely helpless, is actually steering your entire life.
Right, because they are playing dead to catch the fly.
Wow. Yeah.
They present themselves as a harmless, misunderstood introvert. But it's a trap. But let me push back here on the cognitive dissonance aspect. You say it's a web of guilt, but guilt doesn't explain the active malice of things like the silent treatment.
How do you mean?
Well, that requires calculation. By focusing so much on the victim's internal confusion, doesn't it risk painting the narcissist as just a passive, maybe misunderstood participant? The source material clearly shows they are aggressively extracting what they want.
I hear ya. But acknowledging the victim's reality doesn't excuse the abuser at all. It empowers the target by exposing the mechanism of the enmeshment. We have to understand how the trap actually works on the human mind, right?
Fair enough.
The abuser's vulnerability, or fake vulnerability, is used to create a deeply enmeshed imbalance of power. When we focus on the fog, the fear, obligation, and guilt, we are explaining how the victim's reality is overwritten. The victim is conditioned to believe they are literally responsible for the narcissist's emotional survival. That guilt isn't organic.
It's manufactured.
It was installed. The power dynamic is forged in that exact friction between wanting to help a suffering partner and being bled dry by them.
So let's break down how that bleeding dry happens mechanically, because I think this is crucial. Because it's not just tears and sighs, is it?
No, definitely not.
The punishment that follows when the tears don't work is where the mask really slips. The communication style of a covert narcissist is a masterclass in psychological warfare. We see the silent treatment, the eye rolling, the door slamming, and my personal favorite tactic detailed in the material, weaponized incompetence.
Right. The deliberate failure to perform basic tasks.
Exactly. It's, forgetting to pay the electric bill or ruining the laundry so thoroughly that the victim just throws their hands up and says, "Fine, I'll do it myself."
Yeah.
It looks like harmless incompetence, but is a calculated sanction for a narcissistic injury. If you don't give them the validation they feel entitled to, they log that slight into their mental file cabinet. They hold that grudge forever, and they execute their revenge through these micro-insults. It is highly strategic.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered what that strategy actually does to a person's neurobiology over time?
I mean, it stresses them out.
It's more than stress. You call it a strategic punishment, but I'm looking at a victim whose sympathetic nervous system is perpetually activated. The agonizing reality of walking on eggshells. The silent treatment isn't just annoying or childish, right? To a partner or a child, it triggers profound abandonment anxiety. You're basically living in a psychological minefield where the narcissist has the only map, and they rearrange the minds while you sleep. The victim is running a constant background calculation like, what mood are they in? Did I say the wrong thing? How do I fix this?
They are forced to become completely hypervigilant.
Completely hypervigilant. And that slow erosion of self-esteem isolates the victim entirely. They become so hyper-focused on regulating the narcissist's moods just to avoid the silent treatment that they lose their own identity. We cannot decode covert narcissism without understanding the neurobiology of that trauma bond.
Walk me through the actual neurobiology there, because I think people use the phrase trauma bond loosely, like it just means a bad, toxic relationship. What is actually happening in the brain during a prolonged silent treatment?
Okay, so when the silent treatment hits, your brain perceives it as a literal survival threat. You are being ostracized by your primary attachment figure. And that causes cortisol, the stress hormone, to just flood your system.
Right.
You're in a state of sheer panic, actively withdrawing from human connection. Then, let's say maybe 4 days later, the narcissist drops a single crumb of affection. They act like nothing happened and ask, what's for dinner?
Which is maddening.
It is. But what happens in the victim's brain? A massive dopamine spike. The relief is euphoric. Over time, your brain becomes chemically addicted to that high-low cycle. You aren't in love with them. You are caught in an addiction loop, desperate for the dopamine hit that only your abuser can provide.
Wow. But notice the chilling level of control required on the narcissist end to maintain a silent treatment for 4 days while watching you panic.
Yeah, it's severe.
It requires an iron will and a complete, localized lack of empathy. I mean, they are fully aware they are starving you of connection. They just don't care. Because your desperation feeds their superiority. Your panic proves to them that they matter. Which brings me to the most insidious manifestation of this control: tangible, real-world sabotage, covert gaslighting, and financial abuse.
The financial aspect is devastating.
It is, and the mechanics of it are incredibly deceptive. I'm not convinced by the line of reasoning that it's just about the victim's shame, because the material highlights how covert narcissists will engage in line-by-line financial surveillance or use what's called the phantom income maneuver.
Let's unpack that, because it sounds like corporate accounting, but it actually happens at the kitchen table.
It absolutely does. The phantom income maneuver is brilliant in its malice. They don't just hide money, they manipulate their cash flow at the source. They might deliberately overwithhold taxes from their paycheck or max out obscure deferred compensation plans, making their visible take-home pay look artificially low.
Oh, wow.
Right? So they sit there showing you a depleted checking account, claiming they are broke and stressed, while secretly building a massive nest egg. And they frame it as, the economy is just so hard on me, you need to cover the mortgage this month. They are dominating their partner financially while pretending to be the anxious, helpless victim of circumstance.
And when you look at financial abuse and career sabotage through the lens of covert narcissism, the destruction isn't just material, it's existential.
Exactly. They aren't just taking your money. They are deliberately destroying your independence. I mean, the source material talks about them picking an intense, screaming fight at 2 in the morning, the night before the victim has a critical career-defining meeting.
Yeah, sleep deprivation.
That isn't an accident. That is sleep deprivation used as a control tactic to ensure you fail. It proves they are highly aware and capable of strategic, aggressive dominance.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that it's all about marveling at their strategy. Let me tell you why. The strategy would fail entirely if it didn't successfully implant paralyzing shame. It's not about the narcissist strategy, it's about the paralyzing shame that keeps the victim from leaving. The source text gives us a perfect example of this.
Okay.
You have a highly driven woman successfully negotiating million-dollar contracts in her professional life who sits in a therapy office sobbing, asking, "How could I be so stupid?"
Wait, I want to pause on that specific dynamic. The competence trap.
Yeah.
Because to me, from a logical standpoint, if someone is highly successful at work, managing teams, handling millions of dollars, how on earth do they become convinced they can't balance a checkbook at home? Walk me through how that seed of doubt is actually planted to the point where an executive believes she's incompetent.
It starts as a Trojan horse of helpfulness. The covert narcissist doesn't come in and say, "Give me your money." They say, "You work so hard on your contracts, you're so exhausted, let me take over the household budget. I want to alleviate your stress."
Ah. So the victim, thinking they finally have a supportive partner, hands over the reins.
Precisely.
They invite the vampire in.
That's a great way to put it. Once a narcissist has control, they start creating artificial crises. You overspent again, or I had to dip into my savings because you weren't paying attention to the credit card bill. They slowly rewrite the history of the victim's competence.
Right.
They position themselves as the unquestionable expert in the relationship, while simultaneously undermining the victim's reality. Slowly, the victim loses the muscle memory of managing their own life. They start believing the narcissist's narrative, like, "I really am bad with money, I really am selfish, I really do need them to manage my life." They don't just take the money, they slowly acquire a majority share of the victim's self-esteem until the victim literally votes themselves off their own board of directors. The shame is what locks the cage.
But we must acknowledge the sheer predatory masking required to execute that hostile takeover. The allowance system, for example.
Right.
A successful adult is reduced to begging for funds for basic household needs from a partner who claims they are just budgeting or protecting our future. They wrap their financial dominance in a cloak of worry. The world is dangerous, you're too careless, I have to do this for us. That is predatory masking at its finest. If they acted like a dictator, the victim would rebel. By acting like a savior, they ensure compliance.
And the result is that the victim's reality is completely overwritten through covert gaslighting. When the victim finally gathers the courage to confront a behavior, saying, "You hid money," or "You ruined my meeting on purpose," the covert narcissist doesn't explode with grandiose rage like an overt narcissist would.
No, they play the victim again.
They pivot to insidious gaslighting. They look at you with total calm and say, "You're making a mountain out of a molehill. You're so stressed from work, your memory's slipping. I never said that."
You're imagining things.
Exactly. And because the narcissist presents to the outside world as this quiet, helpful, maybe slightly awkward, but inherently good person, the victim looks around and thinks everyone else thinks they're a saint. My friends love them. My family thinks they're so sweet. It must be me. I must be the crazy one.
The communal narcissist aspect of this is fascinating, and it honestly proves my point about the mask being the locus of power, the public virtue versus the private vice.
Right.
As the material notes, covert narcissists often overlap with communal narcissism. They can be the altruistic pleaser in public, the volunteer, the martyr, the one always helping out at the church or, baking cookies for the school bake sale. But behind closed doors, they are a controlling sadist.
It's the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde dynamic, but played out over decades.
Yes, and that dichotomy is exactly why their power lies in the camouflage. If they showed their true face, the victim would leave, and the community would ostracize them. The mask is the source of the power. They weaponize their public goodness against the private victim. When the victim complains to a friend, the friend says, "Oh, but he's so nice," or "She's so shy. Are you sure you aren't overreacting?" The mask isolates the victim from outside help.
But the mask only works because of the conditioning inside the house.
What do you mean?
A healthy person walks into that dynamic, sees the discrepancy between public virtue and private cruelty, and walks out. The victim stays because the covert narcissist has systematically destroyed their psychological immune system. A crumb of affection after a week of the silent treatment feels like a feast to a starving person.
I agree the trauma bond is the glue, but the profiler in me insists we cannot lose sight of the architect here. Let's look at selective stinginess and parasitic lifestyles. The covert narcissist constantly complains of financial instability, leveraging their unfair circumstances to guilt partners into funding their lives. They are professional victims.
Yeah, they really are.
They extract capital, housing, and emotional labor by simulating helplessness. To summarize my stance on this, if you strip away the mask of shyness and depression, you do not find a broken, misunderstood introvert. You find a sharp, unyielding predator who understands exactly how to manipulate the power dynamic to ensure they are always being catered to. To survive a covert narcissist, you have to stop looking at their tears and start looking at their actions. You must recognize them for what they actually are.
And I maintain that recognizing the predator is only step one. True protection comes from validating the victim's shattered reality. You can tell a victim they are sleeping next to a predator, you can show them all the bank statements and the phantom income, but until you help them dismantle the cognitive dissonance, they won't leave. They literally can't.
Because of the bond.
Right, by recognizing the invisible red flags, the pervasive sense of obligation, the chronic guilt, the exhausting reality of monitoring someone else's moods, victims can begin to trust their own bodies again. They have to understand that the confusion they feel isn't a personal failure. It is the intended, manufactured symptom of the abuse. Breaking the trauma bonds requires reclaiming one's sanity from the emotional wasteland the narcissist created.
It is an incredibly dark and complex psychological phenomenon, and I think where our perspectives converge is on the sheer insidiousness of this pathology.
Oh, absolutely.
Covert narcissism is exceptionally dangerous precisely because it flies under the radar of what society thinks abuse looks like. It doesn't look like the stereotypical shouting matches we see in movies. It appears to the outside world, and often to the victim for a very long time, as harmless introversion, bad luck, or tragic victimhood.
Yes, it is the quietness of the destruction that makes it so lethal. It happens in the sighs, the rolled eyes, the withheld affection, the sudden selective amnesia during arguments. It's an invisible erosion of the self.
Which brings us back to a pretty chilling reality. As we dissect these subtle, toxic patterns today, there are undoubtedly listeners realizing right now that they aren't going crazy. They aren't overreacting. That confusing, exhausting dynamic with your partner, parent, or boss actually has a name and an architecture. There is so much more to explore in the source material regarding how these individuals operate and how one can extract themselves from the web.
The journey to understanding this is truly just beginning for many. We encourage you to dive deeper into the literature, to look at the patterns in your own life, and to seek the support necessary to clear the fog.
Because ultimately, the most dangerous predator in the room isn't the one shouting for attention. It's the one crying in the corner, holding a ledger of your vulnerabilities, waiting for you to hand them the key to your reality. Who holds the true power? We leave that for you to decide.